If you've ever had a file server crash on a Friday afternoon, you know the panic, the frantic calls, the "is the backup working?" question nobody wants to answer, and the drive to the office just to poke at a blinking box. I'm Mirko Peters, and today we're looking at a better way: Azure Files. Here's the thing about traditional file servers. They're physical, which means they need maintenance, security patches, backup management, and someone to swap a hard drive when it fails. For small teams, that's a huge burden. You're not running a data center, you're trying to get work done. By the end of this episode, you'll understand what Azure Files really is, why the new file shares resource makes setup much simpler, and when it's the right choice for your team. Grab your coffee and let's dive in. What is Azure Files? So what exactly is Azure Files? Here's the simplest definition. Azure Files is a cloud-based file share you can mount like a network drive with no server to manage, no hardware, no operating system updates, no backup schedules to lose sleep over. With a traditional file server, you're the admin. With Azure Files, Microsoft is the admin. Think of it as a filing cabinet that lives in Microsoft's data center instead of under your desk. You still open the drawer and grab a file, but the cabinet itself, the locks, the fireproofing, the maintenance, that's all handled for you. The difference is, you never have to worry about the cabinet breaking down. Azure Files works with Windows, Linux, and Mac. Any device that supports SMB, that's the standard Windows file sharing language, or NFS, the standard for Linux, can connect. You access it over the internet or through a private network if you want to keep traffic off the public web. And it's fully managed. Microsoft handles the hardware, software updates, backups, and high availability. If a disk fails in their data center, they swap it without you ever seeing it. Most users never notice it's there, but it's a core service. No more late-night emergency trips to the office. Now, to understand why you'd want this, let's look at the old way first. The pain of traditional file servers. So imagine you run a small business with 15 employees. Somewhere in the office closet, there's a physical server. Maybe it's an old desktop you repurposed, or maybe it's an actual server that cost a few $1,000s a few years ago. Either way, it's running Windows Server and serving up file shares for everyone in the company. Here's the thing, hard drives fail, they always do. And when that drive dies, the file share goes down. Maybe you have a backup, maybe you don't. Maybe the backup has been failing silently for 6 months. That's a conversation nobody wants to have. Then there's the space issue. File servers fill up fast. Someone drops 15 gigs of vacation photos in the shared drive. Another department hoards old project files from 3 years ago. To add storage, you either buy more hardware or spend hours reconfiguring what you have. Neither option is fun. And patching. Windows Server needs regular security updates, which means downtime. Someone has to log in on a weekend, apply the updates, cross their fingers, and hope the server comes back up. If it doesn't, you're spending Sunday afternoon troubleshooting. Ransomware is another worry. One click on the wrong email attachment, and your file server gets encrypted. Every file is locked. The recovery process is painful, and it assumes your backups are actually working. If your office has multiple locations, things get worse. Sharing files between branches means setting up VPNs or slow replication. The remote office gets a fraction of the speed the main office has. People complain. You spend time tuning connections. Here's a real example. A small construction company I know had 15 employees and an aging server sitting in the corner of the break room. Every time someone said, "the file server is slow," the owner felt that knot in his stomach. Was it dying? Was it time to spend another $5,000 on hardware? Should he hire an IT guy just to manage one box? That stress, that constant low-grade worry about a single piece of hardware is exactly what Azure Files removes. It's not just about the features, it's about not having to think about it at all. Azure Files takes all that overhead away. Let's look at how it actually works. How Azure Files works: SMB, NFS, and mounting. Azure Files uses standard protocols. What does that mean in plain English? It means you don't need special software or custom tools to connect. If your computer can talk to a network drive, it can talk to Azure Files. For Windows machines, that's SMB, Server Message Block. It's the same protocol your current file server uses. For Linux systems, it's NFS, Network File System. Both are industry standards that have been around for decades. Azure Files speaks both languages fluently. So how do you actually use it? You mount it. On Windows, you map it as a drive letter, Z or S or whatever letter you want. On Linux, you mount it to a folder path. Either way, it looks and feels like local storage. Open File Explorer, there it is. Drag and drop files just like you would to a folder on your own hard drive. Here's the part that surprises people. Data travels encrypted by default. When you use SMB 3.0 or higher, which modern Windows and Mac OS systems support, the connection between your computer and Azure Files is encrypted in transit. Nobody on the network can sniff your files as they move. That's a big deal for security, and it's on by default. You can mount Azure file shares from practically anywhere. From a virtual machine running in Azure, obviously. From an on-premises server connected through VPN or ExpressRoute, even from your laptop over the internet if you set it up correctly. The file share lives in the cloud, but it feels local. Let me give you a concrete example. Say your accounting team needs access to the same set of spreadsheets. In the old world, you'd set up a file server, configure permissions, and hope the network doesn't go down. With Azure Files, you create a single file share, map it as drive Z. on each accounting machine, and they're done. They never know it's in the cloud. They just see a drive letter that works. Authentication is handled through identity. Instead of managing storage account keys, those long strings that look like passwords on steroids, you use Azure Active Directory or your on-premises Active Directory. Users log in with their normal credentials, the same username and password they use for email. No extra keys to store, no shared secrets to rotate. Now, the way Azure Files was originally set up had a twist. That's where the new change comes in. The old way. Storage accounts. Here's where things get a little technical, but trust me, it's worth sticking with me. So originally, file shares weren't their own thing in Azure. They lived inside something called a storage account. Imagine a storage account as a big container. Inside that container, you could put blobs for unstructured data, queues for messages, tables for structured data, and yes, you could also create file shares. But here's the problem. That storage account had limits. IOPS limits, throughput limits, capacity limits, and every file share inside that container had to share those limits. So if you had 5 file shares in one storage account, they were all fighting for the same pool of performance. One busy share could slow down all the others. Network settings work the same way. Firewall rules, private endpoints, those applied to the whole storage account. You couldn't say this file share is only accessible from the finance department's network and that file share is open to everyone. The network rules were all or nothing. Then there were the storage account keys. Every storage account had 2 access keys, and those keys gave full access to everything inside, every blob, every queue, every table, every file share. If you only needed access to one file share, too bad. The key opened everything. Billing was another headache. All the costs showed up at the storage account level. So if you wanted to charge back to different departments, you had to do manual calculations. Well, the marketing team's share used about 30% of the storage, so they owe 30% of the bill. That gets old fast. Here's an analogy. Imagine you're renting a warehouse. Inside that warehouse, you've got several rooms, but the warehouse has a single entrance, a single security guard, and a single electricity meter. Every room shares the same power, the same access rules, and the same bill. If one room cranks up the AC, all the other rooms get warmer. If you want to secure one room separately, you can't, because there's only one door. That's what the old storage account model felt like. One big container with shared limits, shared security, and shared billing. It worked, but it wasn't elegant, especially when all you wanted was a simple file share. But Microsoft heard the feedback and built something better. The new file shares resource. So here's what changed. Microsoft created a brand new top-level resource. You now create a file share directly with no storage account parent. It's its own thing. Think of it like managed disks. Remember how it used to work with virtual machines? You had to create a storage account, then create a page blob inside it, then attach that blob to your VM. It was a whole process. Then Microsoft introduced managed disks. You just create a disk. Done. No storage account, no page blob, no messing around. The new file shares resource works the same way. Behind the scenes, there's a new resource provider called Microsoft File Shares. It's independent and standalone. When you create a file share now, you're not creating a child of something else. You're creating the resource itself. So what does that actually buy you? Let me walk through the benefits. First, each share has its own limits, IOPS, throughput, capacity. They're all per share now. No more sharing a pool with other file shares. One busy share can't slow down another. If your engineering team is hammering their share with build artifacts, the HR department's share keeps humming along. Second, network configuration is per share. Private endpoints, firewall rules, you set them on the individual file share. Want one share accessible only from the finance department's virtual network and another open to the whole company? No problem, they're independent. Third, there's no storage account key. Remember that all-powerful key that gave access to everything? Gone. Authentication is identity-based or through network rules. Users log in with their normal credentials. No shared secrets to manage, no keys to rotate, no risk of a leaked key exposing all your file shares. Fourth, billing is per share. In Azure Cost Management, you see exactly what each file share costs. If you need to charge back to departments, it's right there. No manual calculations, no spreadsheets, no guesswork. Fifth, the control plane has its own quotas. The control plane is the layer that handles operations like creating shares, modifying them, deleting them, taking snapshots. In the old model, lots of administrators working on lots of file shares inside one storage account could hit management limits. Now each share has its own bucket for those operations. It's much harder to hit a limit. Now there's a catch. At general availability, this new resource is currently limited to the SSD tier and the NFS protocol. That's a specific use case, high-performance Linux file shares, but SMB support and HDD tier are coming. Microsoft has been clear about that roadmap. So instead of managing a big bucket with many shares that all share the same limits, the same network rules, the same keys, and the same bill, now each share is its own small bucket with its own lock. Simple. So when does it make sense to actually use Azure Files? When to use Azure Files? So when does Azure Files actually make sense? Let me walk you through the scenarios. First up is lift and shift. You've got an old application that depends on file shares. Maybe it's a legacy business app. Maybe it's a custom tool your team built years ago. Normally, moving that to the cloud means rewriting code, changing configurations, rethinking how data gets accessed. With Azure Files, though, you don't touch a single line of code. The app just sees a network drive. It doesn't care if that drive lives in your office closet or inside a Microsoft data center. Same protocol, same behavior. That's the whole point. Another big use case is sharing configuration files, logs, or data across multiple virtual machines. Say you have a cluster of web servers. They all need the same config. Instead of copying files to each VM and hoping they stay in sync, you mount one Azure file share on every server. Change one file, every server sees it instantly. No more chasing mismatched versions. Development and testing teams love this too. You can spin up a file share in minutes, use it for a week, then delete it when you're done. No hardware to buy, no server to decommission. For anyone who needs temporary shared storage, this is a huge time saver. Then there's the hybrid cloud scenario. Azure File Sync lets you cache files on a local server while keeping Azure Files as the source of truth. Your on-premises users get local performance for the files they access most. Meanwhile, the cloud copy stays up to date automatically. Branch offices love this, remote teams love this. It gives you the best of both worlds without the headache. But Azure Files isn't the answer for everything. Don't use it for high-performance databases. If you need database-level speed, go with Azure SQL or managed disks. Azure Files is a file share, not a database engine. It's optimized for file access patterns, not transactional workloads. There are different tools for different jobs. Don't use it where SharePoint or Microsoft Teams already covers the need. If you're sharing documents that people edit together in real time, SharePoint is the better fit. You get version history, co-authoring, and deep integration with the rest of Microsoft 365. Azure Files is for the scenarios where SharePoint doesn't quite work, and don't use it for applications that need custom file system features like symbolic links, hard links, or extended attributes. Azure Files handles standard file system behavior just fine, but it doesn't support every edge case. Know your requirements before you commit. Let me give you a real-world example. A construction company has field offices in 3 cities. Each office needs access to the same set of blueprints, contracts, and inspection reports. In the old setup, they'd have a server at headquarters, and remote workers would connect through a slow VPN. Opening a blueprint could take minutes. With Azure Files, they create a single share in the cloud. Every office mounts it. Blueprints open in seconds. Contracts are always the latest version. No VPN required. No server to maintain. It just works. But performance and security matter too, so let's touch on those. Performance, security, and cost at a glance. Let's start with performance. If you need speed, the premium tier runs on SSDs and delivers single millisecond latency. We're talking up to 102,400 IOPS per share with the provisioned V2 model. That's serious throughput for demanding workloads. The standard tier uses regular hard drives. It's slower but much cheaper, perfect for archival storage or general file sharing where speed isn't critical. Microsoft recently added metadata caching for SSD shares. This cuts latency by up to 55% when you're listing directories or browsing folders. If your workflow involves lots of small files and frequent folder navigation, this makes a noticeable difference. Now, security. Azure Files has encryption at rest enabled by default. Every byte you write gets encrypted before it hits the disk. You don't have to configure anything. It's just on. Encryption in transit is also on by default for SMB 3.0 and higher. Your data stays encrypted while traveling between your computer and the cloud. Nobody on the network can read it. Microsoft recommends using identity-based access instead of storage account keys. That means your users log in with their normal work credentials, the same ones they use for email and Teams. No shared keys to manage, no risk of a key leaking. For network isolation, you have options. Private endpoints give your file share a private IP address inside your own virtual network. Service endpoints keep traffic on the Microsoft backbone. Firewall rules let you restrict access to specific IP ranges. You can layer these however you like, and there's Microsoft Defender for storage. It monitors your file shares for suspicious activity. If someone uploads malware through the REST API, Defender can catch it. It's an extra layer of protection for sensitive environments. Cost-wise, the premium tier uses provisioned pricing. You reserve a certain amount of capacity, IOPS, and throughput, and you pay for what you reserve. Standard is pay-as-you-go. You only pay for the storage you actually use. If your workloads are predictable, Azure Files reservations can save you up to 36%. Commit to 1 or 3 years and Microsoft gives you a discount. No performance impact, just lower bills. One practical tip: keep your compute and storage in the same Azure region. Cross-region data transfer costs add up fast. Collocate your VMs and your file shares and you avoid those egress charges entirely. That's a lot of info. Let me tie it together. The big picture, why this matters. Here's the core idea. The old storage account model made you manage all that complexity even when all you wanted was a simple file share. You needed to understand storage accounts, shared limits, network rules that applied to everything, and billing that lumped everything together. It was like renting a whole building just to use one room. The new file shares resource fixes that. Now you're renting just that room. One file share, one set of limits, one network configuration, one bill, no extra baggage. For beginners, this changes everything. You can start with a single file share in minutes. No deep Azure knowledge required. Create it, mount it, and you're done. For IT pros, it's even better. Granular control over each share. Better security because there's no all-powerful storage account key. Simpler billing because each share shows up separately in cost reports. And remember, Azure Files isn't just a drive in the sky. It connects to Azure Backup for automated backups. It works with Azure File Sync for hybrid scenarios. And it integrates with Microsoft Defender for security monitoring. That's the larger ecosystem at work. So what should you do with this info? Azure Files gives you a cloud file server without the server hassle. And the new standalone file shares resource makes it even easier. No storage accounts, no shared limits, no complex billing. If you're still running a physical file server, this is your sign to try Azure Files. Start small, create a single share for a test team, and see how it feels. Subscribe on your favorite podcast platform and share this with someone who manages backups on a Friday afternoon.